everybody, and welcome to today's special guest, Mark Fisher. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing good. I always love that intro music.
You know, it was such great fun to make as well, because I don't know if people realize this, but singing is me and my mum, and on guitar is Marcus Sawyer, who's in theatre, and Jeff Levin. We all collaborated to put this thing together just for a little bit of fun, and then I made the video, and it's quite possibly the most fun I've had making a video for YouTube. It's just
That always brings a smile to my face when I see it.
Actually, they tried to copyright strike it once, and they said, oh, this is, you know, the Power Rangers theme tune, and I made a case that it's not. We recorded it, I wrote the lyrics, it's in a slightly different key, and it all went through, so I'm all good to play it on all my videos. But look, today we are going to be talking about, this is a new series that I am starting, because a question that I get a lot is, what do staff members and Sea Org members do all day in Scientology? There's a lot of busy work, and, you know, we see staff members with protesters and stuff in LA and live streaming them walking around and not really doing much. So I thought, let's discuss what a day in the life is like for someone in Scientology, because there are some similarities in terms of schedule and CSP, clean ship program, this sort of thing, but the experience people have at different levels, at different orgs, in different posts is very, very varied. So I thought, let's just talk to a few people about what a day in the life is like of a Scientologist. And I thought you would be a great person to start with, considering you've got your own experience, but you were also Dave Miscavige's right-hand man, right? The leader of the church. You had quite a good visibility of what his day in the life was like. But before we jump into it, you wanted to give us an update about Janice from your channel, right?
Yes, my co-host, Janice Gillum Grady, she's embarked on her cruise through the Panama Canal, started in Seattle the other day and then to Portland, Oregon. And then yesterday she made it to San Francisco. Here's a picture of the ship that she's on, a Norwegian cruise liner. A little bit different than the Free Winds and a lot different than the Apollo.
It looks a lot more colorful, a lot more enjoyable to be on.
Yeah, and it's only 5 years old. It holds 3,500 passengers and 1,500 crew members. So pretty
that's
wild.
Almost all of the Scientologists in the world.
In the world, yeah, that's right. If they wanted to go to sea, this would be a ship for them. But anyway, and then here's Janice, and that's Cheryl Detchiff with her, and they're going under the Golden Gate Bridge yesterday. It was foggy in the afternoon. But Cheryl is an ex-Sea Org member and Scientologist and all that, and a longtime friend of ours. She was at the Gold Base for many years. And anyway, so they went under the Golden Gate Bridge, and then there's Janice. Obviously, San Francisco, it's cool, so you got to wear a sweatshirt and all, but that's the Golden Gate Bridge behind her. And then the ultimate hole and the ultimate RPF is Alcatraz Island in the San Francisco Bay, and that's Alcatraz, otherwise known as The Rock.
Wow. I'd love to visit San Francisco at some point. It's on my bucket list for sure.
I've been to Alcatraz. It's great to visit. I mean, it's an old prison and all that, but you get to go through it. That's where Al Capone, the Chicago gangster, was kept, and the Birdman of Alcatraz, and there's lots of historic figures that were there. But literally, you cannot swim across San Francisco Bay. It was too cold, and there were sharks, and people drowned, and it was the ultimate prison back in the day. But anyway, I thought people would get a kick out of that. Janice sent me these photos from her cruise.
And I love Janice. Before we jump to, you know, I don't want to end up, you know, completely sidetracking from the idea of the video, but Janice is so lovely. I had the pleasure of staying with her and meeting you, of course, when I was in Vegas. Yeah. And I love that she's doing all this traveling and she's posting all these pictures, because what she's doing is she's showing that it is possible to leave Scientology, to speak out about your experience and be considered an SP, but also like have a really fulfilling, enjoyable life and go and see things and do things that you want to do with your life. And it's just, you know, actions speak louder than words. And I just love that she's just living her best life, and that sends a message to people in Scientology that you can be happy without being in the Sea Org.
Yeah, and she's with two other former Sea Org members who are retired as well, and they're enjoying their time. They're going to cruise through the Panama Canal to Miami. So it's a 3-week cruise, and they're going to just enjoy themselves big time. So anyway, I thought I'd share those photos.
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing. And let's say hi to some people in the chat. Lisa Terry is here. Hi, Alex and everyone. First live for a while from Swansea. We've got Mark the Dorset SP saying evening, Alex. So we've got Howard Taylor Esquire. Hi, everyone, from deepest Devon, Dartmoor to be exact. Very nice. SP Crusader. Leanie's here saying hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. If you guys have any questions for Mark or for me, put them in the live chat and we'll bring them up towards the end. But why don't we start with your experience, Mark? Like what, you know, obviously you held different roles in Scientology. It's not like you signed your SEAL contract and were immediately posted in the role that you were in with David Miscavige. So what was life like when you first joined the Sea Org, and what was a daily routine like for you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wanted to mention, I talked to you briefly about it, was that everybody's experience was different in the Sea organization, depending upon where you were working and where you were at. Okay. So my experience is going to be different than somebody else who was maybe didn't make it up to the international management at the secret gold base. Okay. And my experience is going to be different than somebody who, even at the secret gold base, who may have been, working at a lower position than mine. Okay. So I can tell you my experience, and then also what I observed as well. And then that'll give you a comparison when you interview other people and their experiences. That doesn't mean that it was all good, because it was not. I definitely suffered emotional and different physical abuses. But my experience is going to be different than you're going to hear from a lot of people, because I actually had one of privilege, to be honest with you, in the Sea Org. And I'm going to explain that to everybody. So
yeah,
when
absolutely.
I first joined the Sea Org, when I first joined in 1978, okay, I was 19 years old. All right. And I joined and went to Clearwater, Florida, to the Flag Land Base at the time. And I went there with the purpose of going into the Commodore's Messenger organization and working for L. Ron Hubbard. Now, as soon as I got there, I didn't even make it there. They traded me into another position into what was called the LRH Com network. I was an LRH communicator, and I was put in charge of the estates organization, which was the Fort Harrison and the hotels and the estates building and that type of thing. And so my job was to make sure that Hubbard's orders into the Fort Harrison and the estates at the Flag Land Base were complied with. And in 1978, 79, and up until 1980, Hubbard was on the line. So we would get telexes from him each week after the stats were reported, the statistics, and there would be different things that had to be done. It was my job to make sure that the estates organization got them done. So that was my position. Yeah.
So can you give us an example of like in that role, what a typical day looked like where obviously the berthing, you didn't live at the Fort Harrison Hotel. The berthing is a separate building. So what time did you wake up? Did you have breakfast there, or did you go to the Fort Harrison for that? Or how did your morning look on a typical day?
Well, to be honest with you, it was different then, because in 1978, the berthing was in the Fort Harrison. I lived on the 3rd floor in a dormitory with 6 other people, room 369. It now is the bridge going across to the Superpower building. They went right through my room, because I know where my room was, and went right across over there, and that's the bridge now. But we shared, it was a hotel room. Literally a hotel room.
Wow.
We had a 4-high bunk bed, and there were 4 people living on that, and a 2-high bunk bed. And I lucked out and got the second bunk on the 2-high bunk bed, and 1 bathroom, 1 shower, and that was it. There's no television or anything like that. But that was, for a single male at 19 years old, that was considered, a good place to be living. And then we did, at that time in 1978, this is before they bought up all these other properties, our dining room was down in the auditorium of the Fort Harrison, where now they do all their events. They have the big main kitchen, and that was where the staff all ate their meals. And then down below, which was the Lemon Tree restaurant, that was the officer place for meals, dining room. Eventually that changed, because when Ned Frotees was released in 1979-80, all of that had to be moved out because they needed more restaurant space for the public. I mean, it was boomtown at the Flag Land Base. They were making $1 million, $2 million a week in income, and the estates organization, which was the hotel and all that, was making $400,000 a week in income. So it was very, very profitable, and we had to move everybody out. They bought other properties anyway. But a typical day for me was, I woke up in the morning, like whatever, it's like 8 o'clock in the morning. We'd have breakfast until like 8:30, 8:45, and then you would have what they call muster, where you all line up, and then they count, make sure everybody's there and accounted for. And then in the mornings, we would do study. We got 2.5 hours of study or enhancement time daily. All right. And you were required to go. A lot of people skipped out on it, and we weren't supposed to, because they would go work on their position. But we would do that in the morning. We would do we would study L. Ron Hubbard courses. You would start out first with doing like your the training for your job. I'm putting these into terms that people will know.
Yeah.
Hatting is what you call it in Scientology, but you basically wanted to get fully hatted, which meant you had studied all the L. Ron Hubbard policies regarding your position and what you were supposed to do. So you did that first. And then after that, you could do other Scientology training. You could do the organization executive course, or you could do auditor training, whatever it is, you could do other training. So I took full advantage of that when I was in the Sea Org. And like I said, I'm different than a lot of people, okay? Because when I joined the Sea Org at 19, I already had been in Scientology as a teenager in Washington, D.C. And I had already been audited up to grade 4 on the grade chart. I already was up there. I already paid for that myself, and I already was that, right? And I also had graduated from high school. So my experience was I was a high school graduate, whereas a lot of the people in the Sea Org were not educated or anything like that. I was not. I'd never gone to college. So, but I also wanted to learn. I was a very good student before I got into Scientology. So I wanted that data. I wanted that information. So for me, I went every day. And during my time in the Sea Org, I would miss it sometimes, but I actually was able to get all the way up the training side as an executive. I did the organization executive course, the flag executive briefing course. I did the data series evaluators course. Any kind of new pilot that would come down from Hubbard, like the purification rundown or key to life course, anything like that, I was one of the people that would be put on that. So I was very highly trained in Scientology administration. I didn't get highly trained as far as counseling and that type of thing. But as far as administrating and that, I was very highly trained as that regard. And that contributed to me doing well in my position and eventually moving up. I was constantly promoted to the point where I was at the international headquarters in California by the time I was 25 years old. So anyway, that was my mornings. Then in the afternoon, you'd start work, you'd have lunch, and then you would start work. And as an LRH communicator at that time, like I said, Hubbard would order he'd have all sorts of orders into the estates organization, like get more maids into the, because the rooms need to be cleaned, or you need to renovate this, or, whatever it was. And then I would deal with the commanding officer of the Fort Harrison, who was a guy named Mick Davies, and also Lori Englehart, who was in there as well. And my job was to make sure they were doing those things. Right.
And what happened when you had conflicting orders? Because from my experience, when I was at a very different level to you. I was at London Org, which is very low down on the totem pole, and I was in Div 6, which is the public facing division trying to recruit new people in. So I would have targets and orders, you have to sell this number of books, or get this number of courses sold, or whatever, this number of promo. But there was also a longer term battle plan, we called it, a BP, that I had to create. I was like, okay, this is how we're going to long-term increase our stats. And there were things like, I would go and speak to bookshops in the area and try and get them to, stock Dianetics and train them up. And then there was, drilling and getting FSMs to the point where they could sell. So there was longer-term stuff. But the very immediate was cool, get books sold. But there would always be something that came in the way of we've got to do a gold shoot because we want to record a video of you selling books, and that would throw everything out of the window, or there's a bookathon or whatever. So what was your like when LRH told you to do something and then you were in the middle of doing it and then you got another order that seemingly conflicted it or took more priority?
Well, what would happen is, back in those days in the estates organization, their job was to sell accommodations, make money, food, hotel rooms, and make that type of thing. So the commanding officer of that organization, his job was to make money. That was what Hubbard, paid attention to, but also to make sure that the rooms were clean and that they were set up and they had enough personnel and they were nice. But it was trash. It was a trashy place, right? So, whereas the commanding officer would be focused on like how many books are sold or how many this or how many that. My job was to take those orders that weren't necessarily priority, but were something that needed to be done, and coerce or convince people, hey, you need to do this. And of course, I had authority to tell them to do it. But I also, the idea was not to cross order. Ideally, you didn't want to tell them, oh, no, don't make money on that. My thing's more important, because I would get in trouble for that. You know what I mean? For cross ordering, because McDavies or somebody could report it to my senior, and I be, hey, don't interrupt that money line. So it was my job was more of the the project you mentioned of the long-term things. I would be more making sure that stuff got done, right? And so what does that mean? That means I'd be in communication with you as a staff member. Hey, what are you going to do to get this done? What are your ideas on it? Just trying to get them to figure out how they were going to get it done, working out a reasonable timetable. Of course, I was trying to be reasonable, right? But then if they were really breathing down my neck to get it done, I'd be like, you need to get this done tomorrow. You know what I mean?
I was going to say, yeah, being reasonable, that's defined as being worker oriented, Mark. And we all know that's a no-no in the Sea Org.
Yeah. Well, see, and again, it was different times because Hubbard wasn't there. He was in hiding or wherever. It turns out he was in La Quinta, California, but he wasn't there at the Flag Land base. Miscavige wasn't there. He had not taken power. I mean, so it was different than it was later. Right. So, later when I worked for Miscavige, it was a constant cross orders, constant him going around people's backs right down to changing everything. So that became much more a problem later on, And Hubbard had a policy about it, is that you create a dangerous situation when like let's say I go into your area and start issuing orders to people that work for you that you need to do things that I say. All of a sudden, your position is in danger, right? In other words, you've been bypassed to get things done, and so you're not significant, right? Well, that's not a good thing according to Hubbard policy to do that. In other words, I should be getting in trouble for bypassing, right? You, but that's not the way Miscavige operated. Miscavige operated where he was constantly bypassing people. So therefore, people he would put in positions couldn't hold their position in space. They literally could not do their jobs because the people who were under them would no longer listen to them because they had all this shit coming from David Miscavige. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. And so what did, obviously we'll get to the Miscavige era in a little bit, but just going back to Flag, obviously you did your study in the morning, then you had lunch, and then you said you that's when you started doing your job and like doing whatever needed to be done. But there's still a large number of hours in the day left, right? So from what time did you finish lunch? Like 12 or 1 or something, and then
and then get started on your job. You'd have a muster of all the LRH communicators together, because they had one for the Flag Service Org and I was for Estates. And anyway, and then you would get going on your day, and then you would do that till dinner time, have dinner, and then you would do it in the evening until the end of the day, which was usually 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And then you would go to bed and get up in the morning and start all over again. And that was 6 days a week. Okay. I just generally give you the schedule. That was 6 days a week. And then on Sundays, instead of study in the morning, you had what was called CSP time, which is Clean Ship Program. And that Sunday morning was when you could get your laundry. You could go do your laundry and clean your room. That's what you're supposed to do. So that was the general schedule, 7 days a week, right? And then if every other week, in Scientology, a week runs from Thursday at 2 o'clock to Thursday at 2 o'clock the next week. Okay. In other words, all statistics would end at 2 p.m. on Thursday afternoon. So whatever the income was or whatever your statistic was at Thursday at 2 o'clock, that was it. At 2:01, that went into the new week. Okay. So if you were judged, every job had a statistic, something that you were judged on as to whether or not you were doing your job. And if your statistics were rising week over week, you would get 1 day off a week every other week. It wasn't every week, it was every other week. And that generally would be on a Saturday. So you would get a day off. And that was if your statistics were up. Now, a lot of times that would get canceled. And, a lot of times that was thrown out. So, but that was how the schedule was supposed to work. That's not necessarily how it did work. Anyway, but now you ask what I did all day. In my position, looking back on it, I twiddled my thumbs a lot. I wanted to do things that were much more important than, hey, did you get this done? And then going from office to office, hey, did you get this done? I would have much rather had a position where, hey, go out there and sell a bunch of books. And then how many books did you sell? Because then you're constantly doing something that you feel like you have some value to. My job was like glorified busy work, in my opinion.
That was going to be my question was there ever a time, because from 1 o'clock, whenever you finish lunch, right through until 10 at night, obviously there was a dinner break in there as well, but that's 8 to 10 hours of actual work time every single day, 6 days a week. Like, did you have enough work to fill that number of hours every week? Or, because in Scientology you get punished for twiddling your thumbs and not doing anything. Like, you always have to be productive. And even if your stats are up, if you're just sat there, doing whatever rather than working, you'll get in trouble. Was it, what was that like pre-Miscavige? Was it as strict, or were you allowed to slack off a little bit if your stats were up?
No, I could slack off. I did a good job as the LRH communicator for estates, because the income kept growing up and Hubbard was happy and all that. But I didn't have enough to do. To be honest with you, because I worked from 1 o'clock in the afternoon till 6, then from 7 until 11. That's 4 and like 9, 10 hours a day, right? But I didn't have enough to do. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I hated the job that I did when I was doing that, because I wasn't busy enough for that many hours, so I, shoot the shit, talk around with somebody, this and that. I'll be honest with you. There were times where I'd go to Clearwater Library, which was right around the corner, and I'd go in there and I'd sit down and read magazines. I didn't have enough to do,
and
I was
that
very out of ethics. Very out of ethics.
Well, this is the thing. Like, the more people I speak to from that era of Scientology, the greater the difference becomes, in my head, between what Scientology was like when Hubbard was around and what Scientology is like now with Miscavige at the helm. David Miscavige has been in charge of Scientology. He's been the leader for longer than Hubbard ever was, right? Because Hubbard died in 1986. So the Scientology beast, the machine, has changed so much, and there's no way you would ever get away with anything like that nowadays. But back then, it seemed like it's a little bit more relaxed.
Well, it was, but I just remembered something. There would oftentimes be what was called a mission. L. Ron Hubbard would order missionaires from wherever the Commoner's Messenger org was to come in, or there was a Commoner's Messenger organization in Clearwater to go in, and like there would be like a heavy ethics period where these people are not producing enough, or there was a rampant rage of 8 and 79 of what they call out 2D, which was basically people having sexual relations when they weren't married, right? And so then there'd be these people in there, and there'd be all interrogatories, and everybody was on edge. So you were constantly on edge for stuff like that too. So it wasn't like just like, oh yeah, just kickbacks, that type of thing. It wasn't like that. And you knew that if you got caught, you'd get in trouble. So it wasn't that way. But the people who really had it hard always were the people lower on the totem pole, because they had to produce numbers, right? People like managers and stuff like that, like me and all that, we had to produce some too, but I considered my job as an LRH communicator as really busy work. I had some value, but I hated doing that kind of work because I really would much rather be more productive. You know what I mean?
And how did that change when you ended up in David Miscavige's inner sphere, when you were over at the international base and you were his
Well,
right hand man?
yeah, well, what happened before that was in 1981, I was transferred to management of all Scientology organizations worldwide in the West Coast building in Clearwater. I was transferred there because I had done the data series evaluators course, and I was good at doing what they call evaluations. And that's a key management tool that Scientology uses. They analyze statistics weekly, and then they do programs based on that statistic analysis. And I had a skill for that, and that was just me doing it on course, as a student. So the people in management wanted to get me over into that, so I transferred over to that, and I started doing evaluations on the eastern United States. And these evaluations had to go up to Hubbard to be approved. Okay. In other words, it couldn't be approved locally. He had to review them and approve them. And I was the only person that could get them approved, me and maybe one or two other people. And so my talent at that was recognized. So that's when I got sent out to the international base for the first time in 1982 to do training, because they were going to turn over that job from the Watchdog Committee and Hubbard to me, where I would be the one who'd be able to approve all the evaluations that were done in Scientology. And that would be the equivalent of like the senior case supervisor for technical. And so that's when I first went to the base up at the Golden Ear Production. Then I came back to Clearwater, and then we did evaluations on every organization in the world, 144, had never been done before, and got them approved. Hubbard was in hiding off the lines at the time, but he saw a bunch of them, and he wrote that these were really good. And we sent him on his birthday, March 13th, I think it was 81 or 82. I can't remember if it was a year exactly. We sent him a big plaque saying we had a current evaluation on every organization in the world. He was thrilled, right? So anyway, so I did really well with that, which then meant they pulled me up to international management, and that's when I actually was transferred to California to Golden Ear, to the international base.
And how did your daily life differ at the Gold Base? Like, did you still wake up at 8 a.m, have muster, go to breakfast, all that? Like, was your day-to-day routine the same, or I imagine it was slightly different, because I don't imagine you were going to get 2 hours of study time every morning at the Gold Base, no?
Well, it differed because Watchdog Committee, the Commerce Messenger International, and the cinema, the movie orgs at the Gilman Hot Springs property were on a night schedule, so that way they could take care of all. I mean, this is before internet or computers or anything like that. We operated by telex machine. Okay. So anyway, so our day started at 12 noon, and then we were supposed to do study, and then we worked until like 4 or 5 in the morning, and then went to bed. Okay. So it immediately flipped. Right. But what was cool when I got out there was, no uniforms there. We could wear regular clothes, because we were incognito. It was a confidential location and all that. That was nice, But that's when I was around the messengers, and that's when I met Janet. I met Janice before that, but that's when I was around Janice. That's where I was around my future wife. You used a picture of me and her on your thumbnail. She was in the Commerce Messenger organization, and that's when I was around Miscavige again. I hadn't been him before, but that's when I was around him. Was up at the international base, and this is 1982, when a lot of turmoil was happening, where they were reorganizing the corporations. And anyway, that's a whole nother story. But that's when I was up there. So there, I tried to make myself study, but it kept getting knocked out because everything was high priority. We got to get this place ready for Hubbard, yada, yada, yada. Anyway.
And that's where we see, I think, the change start to happen in the history of Scientology, in the pressure starts to become even more so to perform rather than to train and study. I gather back in the day, it was just as important for staff to go up the bridge and to be hatted and to be trained and to actually do Scientology, equally as important as performing and doing your post and doing your job. Whereas you're seeing here now, you're at the international base, it's much more important to get the job done. Your study and training and your religious experience, if you want to call it that, is now second in the priority list, and you will skip it if you need to do something to get the job done.
Yeah, and then I forgot to mention too, when I was still in Clearwater, I actually went clear. I actually got on the OT levels, and I got up through OT3 when I was in Clearwater. But then when I got to the international base, Hubbard always pushed. He wanted people to train and get processed and up the bridge. And in my position, I got privileges. In other words, they had a qualifications division at the base at Golden Era Productions, right? Well, because I was in a senior position at that time when I was brought up there, the Religious Technology Center was just starting. And my position approving evaluations was in that organization. So I was a high priority along with the other people in Religious Technology Center to get auditing and processing and that type of thing. So like I said, I had a much more privileged life. We had better food, we had better berthing, better accommodations. We got paid the same as everybody else. There wasn't any bonuses in that time, but I don't ever remember our pay being taken away. And but we were expected to work long hours and that type of thing. But Hubbard was in hiding, and he was gone. And so people like Miscavige and other senior executives, it wasn't it was normal that they would say, we're staying up, we're doing an all-nighter for 3 nights to get some priority done for Hubbard, so then how are you going to study when you're up all night for 3 nights? You know what I mean? So that's where it fell out.
And Miscavige, this is before Miscavige formally took over and there was a whole coup and, became the leader. So he was a senior management executive, but he wasn't the leader in charge. So at this time, what was his schedule like? Was it the same as yours? He'd wake up and he'd do the all-nighters with you, or would he order the all-nighters and then go to bed himself? Because that's what he does now.
Yeah, well, here's how it worked. Okay, just briefly. At the time when I came up in '82, right? I then, this is a whole other story, but I don't need to go into tremendous detail. But this was when everything was changing in Scientology as far as management. Getting rid of all the missions in Scientology, getting rid of David Mayo, the senior. There was huge getting rid of all the SPs. So there was a big committee of evidence, which is a Scientology justice action against all the senior managers down in Clearwater that I used to work for. And I was made a jury member on this committee of evidence, right? And this was all ordered by Hubbard and Miscavige. They were the ones behind it. Well, I thought it was complete BS. I went, this is ridiculous, because they were going like, oh, this is all false, and they're trying to, corrupt Scientology and take it over and all that. And it was all BS, right? Because I was there, I saw it. It was BS. So I was supposed to be a jury member, right? Well, in Scientology, committee of evidence is really a kangaroo court. You're given a set of charges and you're supposed to find the people guilty. Well, I'm sitting here, I was 18 people, all people that I knew. I'm listening to this, I'm going, this is crazy. Well, that was coming up in my auditing sessions, going like, this is nuts. Well, reports were then turned in to Miscavige and RTC that, hey, Mark Fisher's disaffected. You know what I mean? He's not with the program. So I got taken off that committee and I was put down doing manual labor. And then I was eventually sent to the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force, down in Los Angeles. I was basically kicked out. And I'll never forget Miscavige, who was not my senior or anything like that. He just was a senior messenger, coming down when I was working on the grounds down in what we used to call the G units. He rode up on his motorcycle and got right in my face and basically chewed me out for being disaffected and this and that, blah, 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 and then drove off. And next thing I knew, I was down in California on the Rehabilitation Project Force.
So we have a situation here where you're waking up early and spending 12 or more hours a day doing hard manual labor as punishment. And David Miscavige has a little bit of a lighter schedule and a little bit more seniority. And instead of just doing his own job, he comes along and berates you and insults you while you're doing your punishment.
Well, here's the thing. He actually was working around, along schedule too, because at that time, he was the chairman of the board of Author Services, which was L. Ron Hubbard's for-profit corporation that they set up in 1982 in Hollywood to handle his book sales and movies and this and that, right? And it was a for-profit corporation. So Hubbard wanted him running that, but he also maintained a title called Special Project Ops, where he was the operator over all of the reorganization of Scientology corporations and this and that, right? So he had a dual role. So he spent most of his time in Los Angeles, but once a week he came up to the Gold Base, and that's when he would raise havoc at the Gold Base. Then he would be down in Hollywood, right, and doing his thing. Now, when he was in Hollywood, yeah, his schedule was much more lax than everybody else. I mean, Author Services, they were a for-profit company, so they were 9 to 5, and then the evenings they were supposed to study, but they'd go exercise time, and they got paid minimum wage. Like, they got paid a lot of money. They had bonuses, so he was living high on the hog along there with everybody else. But that's what his schedule was like. It wasn't until later, when after Hubbard died and he took over as the head of Religious Technology Center, that he full-time moved up to the Gold Base, and that's when it really got bad.
So let's fast forward to that point in time. Let's get to the point where you're his right-hand man. I don't know what your official job title was, but personal assistant, something along those lines, right? Yeah. So you were very exposed to what
you want me to describe my day then? I can describe.
Yeah. What was your day like, and what was his day like? What time did you both wake up and go to bed? And
well, after I graduated the RPF, believe it or not, I graduated the RPF in 4 months, including doing the running program in Griffith Park for 51 days. Okay. I graduated in April 1983. And then I was put back on doing the evaluations and stuff. And then it was in October of 83 that Hubbard wrote to Miscavige that he should get what was called a facility differential. It was basically an office that was paid for by Scientology to facilitate Miscavige's activities, because he was doing a dual role, working at Author Services in LA, but also doing stuff for Scientology. So he would set up, Hubbard came up with the idea of a corporate liaison office, and that there would be a corporate liaison in charge, which turned out to be me, and people paid by the Scientology church that would do work for Author Services in the church. So that way there was nothing funny business going on. It was all bullshit. They still bypassed it, and it didn't matter. But anyway, that's when I was chosen for that position in October 1983 by Miscavige. I was recommended by Vicky Asnaran, who was in charge of RTC at the time. And then Miscavige, he agreed to put me on that position. That's when I started working for him. And that's when he would go back and forth. So my job at that time was basically his eyes and ears at Golden Era Productions in Gilman Hot Springs. So when he was in California, which was most of the time, there were still projects that had to be done up at the International Base at Gold, because we were getting ready for L. Ron Hubbard to return. He was in hiding, but the idea was they were trying to get what was called an all clear of all of the lawsuits and the IRS stuff, so Hubbard could come back to the Gold Base to shoot his movies and do his research and actually live there. So my job was overseeing getting all of the spaces ready for him, his house, Bonneview. He had 5 or 6 offices on the property, and then also setting up what were called production lines, because Hubbard's lectures had to be remixed, and then they were going to be produced on cassette and put out. And then also we had a movie shoot crew that had to be trained, and they were going to shoot. He had a whole bunch of treatments and scripts that he wanted to shoot. So my job was overseeing the setups of all of that, believe it or not, setting up all those spaces, setting up the different production lines. And I had to report daily to Miscavige on what was happening on that. I had 2 other people up there that worked for me, a guy named Jason Bennick and a woman named Jackie True. And Jackie took care of Miscavige and Shelley Miscavige's personal affairs, like their laundry, their cleaning their rooms, and their administration. But Jason Bennick and we were the ones who were going into Gold to make sure that they got this stuff set up. And that was a high. We would work again, at this point, we'd gone on to a day schedule, and it was similar to the schedule I had in Clearwater, but I had to report to Miscavige on a daily basis. We had before the internet, we had computers were just starting, and so we had what was called the Mercury system, where you could send basically an email, and I had to send him up a daily report every day on everything that was happening, and then he would respond back to me. So, and if he didn't like it, I would hear about it. So anyway, so that's how it worked out.
And your schedule was the same in terms of waking up at 8, doing breakfast. Obviously, you skipped study a lot of the time, but then you'd have lunch and you would work until, 10 or 11 at night and then go to bed, or was it a little bit elongated? It was the same.
No, that's how it was. But then when he would come up to the gold base. At that point, like once a month. Later, it became every week, right? But once a month. So when he came up to the base, we were on call the whole time. And my goal when he came up, him and Shelly came from California, from Hollywood up to the base, which was about a 90-minute drive, was what we called a flapless weekend, meaning a flap is something blowing up and him getting pissed off and blowing up, right? So my job was making sure I made sure the base looked immaculate, that anything that he planned on doing when he was there was set up, ready for him to look at and approve. Like he would approve, lecture mixes and different things, and the renovations that were going on, he would go and inspect. And so I did a good job if he didn't blow up.
Yeah. Which I can imagine.
If he blew up, then I would.
I can imagine that got increasingly more difficult as he gained more power within the organization and rose the ranks, because it's very clear now that he has a very tight grip on Scientology and whatever he says goes. But at this time, when there was a power struggle going on, he wasn't quite the one ultimately in charge. There was probably a little bit more. Around. Yeah, exactly. So what did Miscavige's schedule day to day look like at that time? Like, was he also on an 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. schedule, or what was he doing?
If we were on the day schedule, or sometimes like we would go back to a night schedule sometimes. But his schedule was different than other people, because like us in our office, right? He'd get up at noon, not 8 o'clock in the morning. He didn't go to study. He would have his meals, he'd do what whatever he was doing. And then he would work till like 2, 3 in the morning. Okay. And so like me and my staff, we had to stay up until he went to bed. Okay. And I'll never forget this. He had 2 dogs. He had Chesley and Chelsea, 2 beagles. And either me or the other girls that worked in the office, they had to walk the dogs, and they had to make sure the dogs did their business before you put them in Dave and Shelley's bedroom, right? Before we could go to bed. So
please tell me their official job title was dog poop, I see.
No, it wasn't, but they had to do that. But here's the thing. So like if he went to bed at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, we had to stay up, and I'd be sitting at my desk trying to stay awake, because there's not a worse feeling than trying to keep yourself awake when you're like dog tired. Because if you walked in and you saw you sleeping, he'd be really pissed off, right? But then we had to get up at 8 o'clock in the morning. Didn't matter. He'd sleep till noon. You know what I mean? So it was totally different, right?
But how would he know if you didn't wake up at 8 in the morning? Is it because of the self-reporting knowledge report kind of system that's in place, or did he have someone posted whose job it was to make sure that you?
No, they would know, because you were supposed to be in the course room, and the supervisor would take roll call. You know what I mean? Things like that. And then the other thing too, I mean, his schedule, he quote unquote worked hard because he was checking all these things, right? But that it was not unusual for him to take off in the middle of the day to go shopping or go see a movie on a weeknight, where everybody else is working. He'd just go into town, go see a movie. Meanwhile, everybody else is working their butts off, right? I mean, and then he always would take somebody he'd take people with him. I mean, he would take us sometimes with him. He'd take other people. Why? Because he didn't want to go like, oh, it was just me. He'd take people along with him. He always had an entourage with him, always. Even when he drove around the property, it was me, or there'd be other people with him. I never saw him and Shelly Miscavige. I never saw them go on a date or out to dinner on Liberty by themselves. They always took people with them.
Sounds like maybe he's got a little bit of an insecurity there about not wanting to be on his own, always having to have people around him. Who knows?
Well, yeah, it did, and also, he's a short man now. Now, this is all way before. This is way before the violence started. Okay, this is before the violence. He had an incident in 1982 where he spit in the face of somebody, a guy named John Axel. Okay, and that was a big deal. And then also at Author Services, he also, physically, came after some people there that we had heard about, but it hadn't happened in the Sea organization. Because remember, Hubbard was still alive. Pat Broker and Annie Broker were with Hubbard, and they basically were the filter line. So he wanted to make sure all the information that went to Hubbard did not make him look bad, and he was the filter point on it. So he had to keep his P's and Q's in. It wasn't until after Hubbard died and he took over that he started to become more and more belligerent. And that's of course when I left, you know what I mean? Because he physically attacked me, and that was the last straw for me. I was not going to put up with that, So, I moved jumping ahead, but basically, if you wanted to know the schedule. Now, I wanted to tell you a couple things too about me working for Hubbard me working for Miscavige, is once he moved up to the international base and took over Religious Technology Center, there was no way he was going to take a pay cut from what he was getting at Author Services. He got big bonuses out there at Author Services, and so did the rest of the staff. In other words, he always would include them, but of course his bonuses and Shelley's were the most. So they had to set up a bonus system for Religious Technology Center and then also for CMO International.
Sorry to interject, but do you remember roughly how much like the bonuses were off the top of your head?
I do.
Yeah,
I do. Well, let me tell you. So we got paid our, the same as everybody else. I think it was $24 a month at that point, right?
Wow.
But then once a month we would get monthly bonuses, and it was based off the Miscavige's bonus was based off of the increase in Sea Org reserves. In other words, how much money was in the bank account that they just kept stacking up. And if it was increasing, he was up stat. And then the bonus system was a percentage of that increase. And then that would be put into a pool, right? A pool of money. And then each position had different units assigned to it. So like he had the most units and the dishwasher had the fewest units, right? So if a unit was worth $10 and you had one unit, you got $10. But if you had 1,000 units, you got $1,000, or $10,000. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, his and Shelley's bonuses when I was there, my bonuses were about $1,500 to $2,000 a month working for him. His was more like $3,000 to $4,000 a month, plus Shelley's was about $2,000. They were making $6,000 to $7,000 a month, almost $100,000 a year when I was working there.
And that was in the 1980s, right? So accounting for inflation, that's probably a lot more in today's money.
Right, and if you think about it too, I mean, everything else is paid for. All your food, your clothing, your berthing. I mean, you have no expenses, so that's just money that goes straight into your bank account. Like for me personally, the time that I worked for him from 1983 until 1990. During those 7 years, I had $26,000 in my savings account, cash. I paid $7,000 for a used car, cash. I was married. My wife made $24, and every once in a while she'd get a bonus from CMO International. But the majority of the money was mine, right? So when I left, when I finally left in 1990, I think we had $18,000 left in our account. I wrote her a check for $9,000 so that I could get the hell out, and I took my $9,000 because she wouldn't leave with me, So like I said, I had much more of a privileged position. I was not like somebody in gold who had their pay taken away. I never was on rice and beans. You know what I mean? So that's why I say, and I abhor it. Now in retrospect, it's all bad, right? But at the time, you're like, well, I'm making this money, and I felt that I earned it because I was dedicated to the cause. You know what I mean? But yeah, also, I had a much more privileged existence.
Yeah, but also this was pre all of the big changes, right? Like obviously there were lots of changes going on, but Miscavige was in a different position then. It's even when he
Right.
took over and he was leading, like the abuse and the tight grip that he held on management and the control of Scientology, it over time got progressively worse and worse. And
Yes.
you telling me about him traveling, for example, to the gold base from LA. Me as a Scientologist would look at that as almost a waste of time. Like obviously you've got to get there, but if you're traveling in a car for an hour and a half, it was instilled in me that you need to make every minute of every day
Well,
produce. So you
hold
can't
on.
just be sitting in a car for an hour and a half. Like you've got to be doing something while you're in the car. Like can you be,
Well,
you know,
here's how they justify it. Here's what he would do. He'd listen to L. Ron Hubbard lectures that were being
that was his
mixed
study
in
time.
his car for the 90 minutes. Or Shelley wouldn't drive. He would drive, right? It'd be him and Shelley, right? But he would always have his trunk was full of banker's boxes that we took in of different things and work that he had. But we got Mark Yeager, who was the commanding officer of the Commoner's Messenger Org and also the chairman of Watchdog Committee. He had a van. He had a van and he had a captain's chair put in the back of the van so that his assistant could drive him when he had to go to LA, and he could sit in the back in the captain's chair and continue going through submissions that he had to review during that 90-minute drive. So yeah, it was believed that you don't want to waste any time. That's how
Yeah.
crazy it was.
And
And of
for
course,
me,
you didn't get time off. You didn't get time off. Now the other thing I wanted to mention too, as far as Miscavige, right, was when he was in California, in LA. Sorry, not when he was in Hollywood in LA, and not at the base, he would be gone sometimes for months, and it would just be my reports back and forth. You can talk to people that were around in those days. That it was much better at the gold base during those times because he wasn't around messing everything up. But also you had a normal schedule. You got your study time, you got exercise time, got liberty and all that. It was only when he came up there full time that all started going away again, and you were working around the clock and this and that. So it's with Miscavige is one thing, and when he's not there is another.
And so for me as like a lower level staff member, like I'm so low on the totem pole in comparison to international management and Miscavige and all of that. So but our expectation and what I was led to believe was Miscavige is, the most important person on planet Earth. Obviously L. Ron Hubbard is more important, but he's dead. So Miscavige is the only one who is really making a difference in this world. And so therefore anything he says or does is super, super important. And he is to be incredibly respected because he spends every second of every day working hard to forward the aims of Scientology or expand or whatever. And so, his schedule is to be respected. He works harder than everybody else. He works more hours than everybody else. And so this picture gets painted in your mind of this guy who wakes up at the crack of dawn and every second of his schedule is managed by his personal assistants. And as soon as he finishes one meeting, I don't know, on Zoom or whatever, as soon as that's done, his assistant is there handing him another laptop so he can immediately start the next Zoom meeting or whatever, right? That's the level of detail with which his schedule is kind of organized in my head as a low-level Scientologist. And when it comes to dinner time, he has someone go and fetch him dinner, deliver it to him at his desk so that he can eat it whilst he's replying to emails, and then he waits until he physically can't stay awake any longer before he's literally falling asleep at his desk, and then he's carted over to his bed, which is next to his desk, because you don't want to waste time traveling to a different bedroom. Like that, this is the image in my head of what Miscavige's day-to-day was like, because that's the picture that's built. But it wasn't like that, was it, Mark?
No, and it also was not as extravagant as it became after I left, because during that time, even when he took over RTC, Religious Technology Center, after Hubbard died, he flew economy like everybody. I mean, like when they had to go somewhere, he flew economy. It was not first class, and then there was absolutely no private jets. He ate in the dining room with us. we all shared a table together, you know what I mean? And he ate with everybody else. It wasn't like he had his private chef and his private this, his private that. I mean, we took care, meaning me and the people in my office, we cleaned his room, we did his laundry, and we took care of his administrative needs, right? But when we talk about his room, it was just a room in the villas that was just one room with a bathroom, like, you know, like a hotel room unit. Yeah, it was nice, and he fixed it up, and he had a great stereo and all that sort of thing. But like, I had to go wake him up. You know, like, he couldn't wake up in the morning, so I would have to physically go into his room and wake him up. There was a whole procedure. I had to do this for several months. And it was a whole procedure. Like, he couldn't wake up to an alarm clock. He and Shelly would be in bed, and I'd have to come into their room and come around and shake him and wake him up and have his coffee ready for him. Do you know what I mean? So it wasn't anyway. But it got worse. And then what I heard was, after I left in 1990, up until the time that the IRS tax exemption happened in 92 or 93, oh, he was very frugal about what he spent and what he spent on himself. But then once they had that, oh, then it was like, oh, I've got to be, there's Misha for you. Hold on. I understand he then, you know, raised his salaries and started flying private jets and doing all this stuff as a leader of a religion. You know, see, the thing is that if he had done that when he first took over RTC and all of us were all, you know, there were still senior messengers who were senior to him in the Commodore's Messenger Org, like Janice, you know, and other people who'd been around Hubbard for years. And we would have gone like, what are you, nuts? Hubbard would have never approved that. Do you know what I mean? Hubbard didn't fly first class on stuff, you know what I mean? So he couldn't get away with that. Anyway.
So what I'm just thinking we should start wrapping up, because we are approaching an hour, and then we'll do some questions in a second. But I think, to sum up, like, what does David Miscavige actually do, like, day to day, right? Well, I'm getting the picture that he wakes up really late, he loafs around. When he's ready, he goes and then causes some terror and, you know, tries to bypass management and handle some flap and, you know, shout at people and abuse them. And then when he's done, he loafs off, plays the Xbox, and goes to bed really late. Like, what's his actual, what does he do?
No, I mean, no, I will say, when I was there up until 1990, right, when I worked for him, he did put in hours. I mean, he did work. What his day consisted of was he had to approve everything in Scientology. So that meant, from the smallest little detail of a design to all the lectures to the books to you name it. So he constantly had banker's boxes of submissions of things next to his desk that he had to go through personally. This was his choice, to make sure that they were perfect in the way that he wanted them, right? And then if he went through it and he didn't like it, it'd be all hell would break loose, and he'd order everybody up into his office so he could berate them and throw the box at them and get rid of it. You're wasting my time. So that happened on a routine basis. He then, at the old base, he then would get on his motorbike and drive down to see what renovations or new building that was being built. And then he would go through and inspect it and give his change orders and opinions, you know, and then drive back up or go down to the movie studio to see what they were working on, and go down to, you know, the lecture hall and do that. As a matter of fact, that was what I did. You know, like, if you want to know what I did when I worked for Miscavige, I stayed out of the office as much as possible, because I did not want to be sitting in the office.
I don't blame you.
We had an adjoining office with an adjoining door. If I was in there on the computer, I felt like I wasn't doing anything. So as soon as, you know, we got done with muster, boom, I was out around the property, you know, making sure things were getting done that needed to be done on the priorities or whatever. And just because I didn't want to be physically in the office with him, because he could explode at any time. And in those days, we didn't have cell phones. I had to have a pager, a beeper, right? And this wasn't like a digital beeper. It was just one that would go beep, 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 beep. You know, one beep was Dave, two beeps was Shelly, and all that. And I hated when that beeper went off, because that meant I had to get to a phone call, and then I had to come up to the office to find out whatever he be exploding about something, and I had to sit there and listen to him explode and not take it personally, because he'd be yelling full volume at me about something I had nothing to do with. You know what I mean? But that's how I lasted in that job, is because I could sit there and I'd tell him, sir, I'll take care of it. I'll handle it. Let me handle it. I'll go see the people and I'll get it sorted out. And I did. And I had a reputation for being the good cop. When he went in and did the bad cop, I was the good cop that went in there and said, hey, Alex, let's figure out how we can get this done. Okay. What do you need? Do you need money? Okay, I'll make sure that you get the money. Do you need this? That's me. I never yelled at anybody. As a matter of fact, they got mad at me, Shelly and Dave did, because I didn't blow up or get mad at people. I didn't yell, Anyway, that's enough of that.
So would you say that it's fair to say that without Miscavige, like the structure and the organization of the Church of Scientology is such that if he was removed from the picture, it would still continue operating as it currently, like he's not needed in terms of, he likes to personally micromanage everything. But if he didn't do that, things would still get done and the organization would still continue, right? Like he is in a useless role that is completely self-fulfilling. He wants to feel important.
Things would get done, but I mean, he's basically the person making sure that it gets done. He's the ultimate bulldog. You know what I mean? I mean, Hubbard set up the structure of how a Scientology organization is supposed to run and what statistics they have and this and that would probably continue. But somebody's, he's up there driving the ship at the top and, causing whatever trouble it is. Scientology would be a lot different if he had never taken over. It would be a lot different. There wouldn't have been, that's the other thing too, is he was involved in all the legal and OSA stuff, the fair gaming, all the PIs and all that. That's all stuff that I was not part of. That was that was Marty Rathbun. And that was DM. Whenever Marty went in DM's office, the door shut between ours and I never knew what was going on. And that was a whole nother world that he ran. Do you know what I mean? And Miscavige needs a fight. He's always fighting something and he loves that fight,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mark, thank you so much. I think this has been really interesting. It's been fascinating to hear what life was like at the Gold Base and being so close to Miscavige and how your schedule has changed. Yeah, I was going to get to that in a second. I was going to say how your schedule has changed from being at Flag to being at Gold to then how it changed when Miscavige took over. So thank you so much. Let's look through some of these comments. SP Crusader here. I think this is a question for Janice, actually. I don't know if you might be able to answer on her behalf, but do you remember Joyce from the ship? She married Gary Earl, who went on to work on a Reconnection magazine that John Atack was involved with. But we can pass that on to Janice. I can text her and see what she says. Educon here says, a burning question for Mark. I remember he said on a stream he had family involved with another cult. Was it Ramtha? If it was, was he connected to Mark Vicente from Nexium, who was also in Ramtha?
No, my father got involved with my father and his second wife, my stepmother, got involved with Ramtha, as well as my younger brother, who then eventually left. And Ramtha is Jay-Z Knight. It's a channeling. She channels some ancient warrior named Ramtha. And my dad died in 1996. And so, but I don't know about Mark Vincenti. I don't know anything about that.
Okay. He was in The Vow, the Amazon Prime documentary.
Yeah, I know who he is.
Oh, but it was
Vincenti, but he didn't know Ramtha. Yeah.
Okay, fair. Lisa Terry, when you join in your teens, if your parents never been in, do you still have permission to speak to them? I mean,
yes, as long as they're not attacking Scientology or being anti-Scientology, you can speak to them. They don't even have to be in Scientology at all.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, when they were trying to recruit me into the Sea Org, my parents weren't Scientologists, but there was a whole handling program, because what they didn't want to happen is for me to join the Sea Org, me to move to Flag and be there all day, every day, and have limited contact with my parents, and for them to then create a problem for Scientology's PR because they have limited contact with me. So my parents didn't need to be Scientologists, but they needed to be okay with the fact that I was going to join the Sea Org. And so, no, they don't have to be Scientologists, but they have to be heavily vetted, I suppose. And you would have to have permission. Like you'd be able to send messages or emails or whatever to keep them happy, but it would all be monitored. And it's not like you could just pick up the phone and give them a call at them in the middle of the day, because someone will shout at you for, HENR or whatever. Like you need to be working and being productive.
Yeah. And my dad was a Scientologist when he's the one who got me in Scientology. My mother was not, but I had graduated high school and was an adult, so I could make my own decisions. I didn't need my parents to approve it.
All right. Jessica LaBarber says, Mark Fisher, great to see you.
Hi, Jessica.
And we've got L. Ron Hubbard himself here in the chat. So many thumb twiddlers. That's the reason we can't clear the planet. At least Alex was a top bookseller.
Hey, listen, I complain all the time to myself. A lot of people left the Sea Org with a skill that they could use in the real world. You know what I mean? Either as a salesman or like Mark Headley in cinema, and my friend Tom Provenzano was a cameraman and eventually worked in Hollywood. I mean, they came away with carpentry skills. John Brousseau, he could do anything from cars to this and that. Now, I had no skills in that regard that were basically transferable because I was basically a pencil pusher.
Yeah, it's difficult, I think. But I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know why I said yes, because you do have transferable skills. And
I do. I'm exaggerating, but I mean, some of these guys came out of the special effects with Mark Headley and all that stuff, making $50 an hour right out of the bat because they knew how to do animation on computers. You know what I mean?
But I think that's like, it's more your mindset when you come out, because there are people who are personal assistants or executive assistants who are earning hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? There are skills to managing schedules, getting things done right.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not. Listen, I did okay. I'm not saying I did okay. You know what I mean?
But what I'm saying is, when you leave, you don't realize that you've got those skills and you don't know how to transfer them into the real world, because everything that like your life has been consumed by Scientology. So it's really hard to come out and have a resume and be like, great, I'm an excellent project manager and I should be earning $100,000 a year. Like, it takes time to reintegrate with society.
I'll just give you an example, just briefly. We had Saturday renovations every Saturday at the Gold Base, right? Where literally all the Sea Org members went, and if they were building a building, they did the framing of the building, or if they were doing the drywall, they did the drywall. And we had teams that did all this stuff. I wasn't allowed by Shelley and Dave to be on the drywall team or to be on this and learn the skill. I had to be a supervisor of it. Do you know what I mean? In other words, I had to go around, make sure people were working and doing their job. I would have much preferred to learn how to be a drywall, doing sheetrock and drywall, because that would have been a skill I would have later on.
Well, management is a skill, Mark, and you've got
I know, and I did okay, but I'm just saying.
Yeah. All right. Witness here is saying, hi, Mark and Alex. Super interesting. Thank you so much. And for a first time in a long time, we've got Ash here from TSFU, the podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much, Ash. Good to see you.
Scientology peeling the onion. Hit that subscribe button. By the way, this video, we're live right now, but I'm going to be downloading it and putting it up on our channel as well, so people can watch it there.
Yes, that's what I'm bringing up here. So this is, you've got two channels. This is your Las Vegas Travel and More channel, which is at mfisherlv. And this is where you talk about your travels and your life outside of the Scientology YouTube world. And then this is your main channel with Janice, which is Scientology Peeling the Onion, where you talk to ex-Scientologists and about the history of Scientology and what life was like back in the day. So if you're watching this on my channel, please go and subscribe to both of them and show Mark some love.
Thanks,
alrighty, Professor Karkan, great username. Hi, friends. Hans Christian Schwartz, you bring that time near really well, Mark. Eric Honecker, great stream, really interesting. Only ruined by YouTube's intrusive adverts every bloody 5 minutes. Well, I set the ads to come every 12 minutes. So they shouldn't be every 5 minutes. But look, we do this work for free, and it doesn't cost anything to watch an ad. And the adverts is what pays us a little bit of money to cover the expenses of running a channel. So you get free content, and we get a little bit of ad revenue. So please, try not to complain about the ads.
Nobody's getting rich. Alex and I are not getting rich from doing our channels. Trust me.
I earned I think $150 last month from ad revenue. Like, it's not much, but that goes towards things
expenses. Then you have expenses like the StreamYard and like your cameras and all that. I mean, there's expenses involved with this.
And Photoshop to make the thumbnails. It's not cheap, but it's appreciated. And if you want to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee, PayPal. You've got merch as well that you share on your channel regularly, Mark. So there's ways of supporting the channel. But if you don't want to contribute financially, just watching an ad helps us out. So there we go. Jessica LaBarber here says, funny, my strategy at Gold Base was exactly the same in 88 to 91, sorry. Stay as far away from DM as I possibly could. And then the final comment, and I will attest to the fact that Mark did all he could to make life easier for the rest of us.
Oh, thank you, Jessica. I appreciate that.
Do you remember Jessica? Did you work with her?
I don't. Maybe that's not her same last name. I don't know. I don't remember where she worked and all that. But that's okay. I'm getting old, so I don't remember everybody. Well, it's nothing against Jessica. I just don't remember.
It's a compliment. It's good, and that's proof of what you said about being the good cop, and even in the face of adversity and Miscavige really pushing down hard on his staff members and ruling with an iron fist. There are some people, and you were clearly one of them, that went around and said, "Hey guys, let's keep focused. We're trying to achieve a mission here. I know it's horrible and it's hard, but how can we work with you collaboratively?" Which I think is a better approach anyway. So that's just evidence of your kind heart. And she just gave us a super sticker. I don't know whether that's your channel or mine, but thank you so much. I appreciate it. Oh yeah, because we're streaming on mine. Okay, right. Well, thank you very much. Last comment here. She just says, I was on the E-meter line when the Mark Super 7 push was on, then later RPF'd.
Okay, well then I would have known her in HEM. It was called HEM, which was the Hubbard E-meters. We moved it. Janice and I actually moved it from California to the Gold Base, and then eventually into what was called Building 36. And I was involved with the whole Mark 7, all the different colors and the plating and all that,
Wow, there we go. And if you guys want to hear more about Mark's story, we did a couple of interviews on my channel, haven't we, where we talk about your journey in and out of Scientology, and we go into depth with all that sort of stuff. So go and check them out. And obviously,
and also briefly, I just wanted to mention, since Janice is gone for 3 weeks, I'm going to be doing a couple of shows. One I'm going to do myself about setting up the base for Hubbard's return in the early 1980s, getting all of his office spaces and what I had to do all that stuff. And then the separate one will be about setting up the different production lines, like the audio, the mixing lines, the cinema lines, the sound recording lines, and all that, and what all was involved with that, because I was intimately involved with all that stuff. And I think people might find it interesting. So
absolutely. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining me. I think this has been really, really insightful. And like I said, this is the start of a new series for me. So I'm going to be interviewing people from all over the spectrum of the Scientology org board about what their life was like on the day-to-day as a Scientologist. So stay tuned. There will be more of these. And if you've got any questions for me or Mark, leave them in the comments down below. And how do people get in touch with you if they want to send you a message, or say Jessica wants to reach out? How does she do that?
My email address is markfisher57@gmail.com. That's MarkFisher57@gmail.com. I just wanted to mention one last thing about this, because I'm not trying to paint my life as great when it was in New York, but I, have left, and then I had nothing to compare it to. I came straight out of high school, but then when I got out, I realized all the things that I was involved in. Now, I wasn't involved in the abuse and the things that have happened to other people, and they're heartbreaking stories that we have learned about on our channel as well as on Alex's channel and stuff like that. It was not something that I was aware of, but my heart goes out to those people, and that's one of the reasons why we speak out now. So when I paint the picture of what my life was like working in the Sea Org, trust me, I was under a lot of emotional and physical stress, including at the very end, that my wife taken away from me and put in the RPF. Having to escape 3 times and had to come back. Miscavige physically beating me up. So, trust me, I had my share of abuse too, and I'm not uncaring towards those who also, were in lower positions and didn't get paid and ate rice and beans and had to stay up all night and slept in really bad quarters. So I'm very, very sympathetic towards that, and I'm sorry that happened to those people. But I just wanted to paint that. The picture that I paint was more the upper echelon in terms of the way things were.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons I was inspired to do this series, because abuse takes place in many different forms, right? And the abuse that people suffer in Scientology it's different and it's varied according to what your own experience was like. Yes, it was traumatizing for everybody, but there's no real way of comparing it because it takes form, a different shape for every single different person. And so I thought by telling people's day-to-day stories, that's one way of perhaps illustrating what that was like for different people. And so yes, there were times when things were okay and you were managing expectations and stuff, but like you said, you were on the RPF and you had all these horrible things with your wife and so on. Like that, everyone's experience is different and the abuse takes different forms. So that's why I want to do this, is to try and show the length and the breadth to which the harm this organization does exist.
Well, Alex, you are one of a kind in terms of your work that you're doing and all that, and I really appreciate it. And I think everybody supports you, and we appreciate your channel for sure.
Thank you. And likewise, I couldn't do it without the support of people like you and Janice and everyone else out there. It's a team effort. We've all got our own bit to contribute. So
yeah.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you, everybody who joined, and we will see you on the next one.